Abraham, obedient to God's command, left his father's home with his nephew Lot. As their possessions and herds grew, conflict arose between their herdsmen, necessitating a separation. Abram, despite being the recipient of God's promise, graciously offered Lot the first choice of land. Lot, prioritizing material wealth, chose the fertile Jordan Valley, pitching his tent near Sodom. This valley, though lush and reminiscent of the Lord's garden, was inhabited by wicked men who sinned greatly against the Lord. In contrast, Abram, directed by God, looked up and saw the land promised to him. 3 men, later revealed as angelic beings, visited Abram near the oaks of Mamre. Abram, showing hospitality, offered them water, rest, and a meal. During their conversation, the Lord reiterated his promise to Abram that Sarah would bear a son within a year. Sarah, overhearing this, laughed inwardly, doubting the possibility due to their old age. The Lord questioned her laughter, and she denied it out of fear. The men then departed, heading toward Sodom, with Abraham accompanying them. The Lord, recognizing Abraham's future as a great nation, revealed his intention to investigate the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah's grave sins. Concerned for the righteous within the cities, Abraham pleaded with the Lord to spare them if even a small number were found. Through a series of exchanges, Abraham bargained with God, lowering the number of righteous needed to spare the cities from 50 to 10. The central theme of this narrative is justice. God, though all-powerful, is committed to fairness. He reveals his plan to Abraham to emphasize that blessings come with responsibility. Abraham's descendants were to uphold righteousness and justice to receive these blessings. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah highlighted the need for judgment. Abraham, believing in the presence of righteous individuals in Sodom, interceded on their behalf, appealing to God's sense of justice. Abraham's actions reveal his noble character. He selflessly prayed for the well-being of both the wicked and the righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah. His earlier rescue of these people during a battle demonstrated his compassion and bravery. His persistent intercession, marked by humility and reverence, showcased his unwavering faith. While Abraham's bargaining with God might seem perplexing, his prayers were rooted in genuine concern for justice. He sought deliverance for Sodom if even a small number of righteous people could be found. His motive was not to sway God's will, but to advocate for the innocent. The story's implications resonated with Israel. Just as Abraham's compassion led him to intercede, so should Israel be concerned with upholding righteousness and justice to secure God's blessings. The cries against Sodom and Gomorrah served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked wickedness. Prayer, as exemplified by Abraham, involves understanding God's nature and actions. It's not passive observation, but active engagement, reminding God of his promises and principles. Abraham's concern extended beyond his nephew Lot to encompass the entire population of the cities. His relentless intercession, driven by a heart that valued those made in God's image, set an example for future leaders. Following their departure from Abraham, the 2 angelic visitors arrived in Sodom, where Lot, now a civic leader, welcomed them into his home and offered them hospitality. Lot, a morally upright man, was deeply troubled by the wickedness surrounding him. His presence in Sodom, despite his discomfort, reveals a gradual decline in his choices, from merely looking toward the city to ultimately residing within its corrupting influence. This serves as a reminder that being distressed by wrongdoing is insufficient. Action must be taken to avoid complicity. Lot's poor judgment led to dire consequences. His compromises eroded the trust and respect of his family and friends, resulting in their disbelief and, ultimately, their demise. Yet amidst his mistakes, his insistence on hospitality towards the visitors shines through. Lot's urgent and eager invitation, though unconventional, demonstrates the importance of not just what we do, but how we do it. As the men of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded Lot's house, their disregard for decency and morality became evident. Their sole focus was to gratify their own desires, showing a complete lack of respect for the guests. This collective depravity, as highlighted by the phrase, "all the people from every quarter," reveals the city's widespread corruption. The Bible, in Ezekiel 16:49-50, likens Jerusalem's sins to those of Sodom. Both cities were guilty of pride, laziness, and injustice towards the poor. However, Genesis reveals that God's wrath extended beyond these sins to encompass the heinous acts of sexual violence and immorality prevalent in Sodom. The lesson here is a call to identify and reject all forms of wrongdoing, not just a select few. Lot, faced with the mob's demands, desperately bargained for his guests' lives. He offered his daughters as a compromise, a morally reprehensible decision that mirrors the crowd's depravity. This act underscores the societal devaluation of women in that era and the distorted concept of hospitality that prioritized guest safety above family well-being. The men of Sodom mocked Lot and rejected his attempts at moral guidance. Despite his initial friendly approach, his pleas fell on deaf ears, illustrating the futility of compromise with the wicked. Their disrespect for Lot, even after he called them brethren, emphasizes their utter lack of regard for his values. The angels then intervened, striking the mob with blindness, a supernatural act that revealed their true nature. Lot finally realized that his guests were not ordinary men. The mob's physical blindness mirrored their moral blindness, highlighting their inability to perceive the truth. The angels, unaware of the full extent of Lot's family, inquired about others in need of rescue. This serves as a reminder to care for the salvation of not only ourselves, but also our loved ones. Lot, upon learning of the imminent destruction, attempted to warn his sons-in-law, but they dismissed his warning as a joke. Their disbelief, a consequence of Lot's compromised lifestyle, sealed their fate. This underscores the importance of living a life that reflects our beliefs, as our actions can influence those around us. Lot, though saved, achieved little of lasting significance. His life serves as a cautionary tale that salvation alone isn't enough. What truly matters is how we live our lives after being saved, as our actions have eternal consequences. The angels, acting as messengers of warning, urged Lot and his family to flee Sodom before its destruction. Their clear and repeated warnings highlight the urgency of the situation. Lot's hesitation, despite knowing Sodom's wickedness, reveals the danger of becoming too comfortable with sin and resisting God's call to turn away from it. The angels, driven by compassion, physically led Lot and his family out of the city. This intervention underscores God's mercy, even when his people are reluctant to leave their sinful ways. The absence of Lot's sons-in-law in this scene suggests their refusal to heed the warning, a consequence of their disbelief in Lot's message. Lot's predicament reflects a struggle between worldly attachments and spiritual devotion. His inability to find joy in either realm emphasizes the importance of finding balance and prioritizing our relationship with God. The angel's command to escape for your life and not look back emphasizes the need to focus on the future and our salvation. Lot's wife, however, disobeyed this command and turned back to look at Sodom, resulting in her transformation into a pillar of salt. This act symbolizes the danger of dwelling on the past and clinging to worldly desires. Lot's wife, though unnamed, serves as a crucial figure in the biblical narrative. Her familiarity with God, through her husband and Abraham, highlights the possibility of being lost despite religious upbringing and spiritual advantages. Her fate underscores the importance of continued obedience and unwavering faith. Looking back, as Lot's wife did, signifies doubt in God's promise and disobedience to his direct command. It also reveals a potential attachment to the sinful ways of Sodom. The story serves as a reminder to trust in God, focus on spiritual matters, and avoid dwelling on the fleeting pleasures of the world. Lot's wife's story is not just a historical anecdote, but a timeless warning relevant to us today. We are called to prioritize our relationship with God, obey His commands, and resist the temptation to look back at a world that is passing away. Her fate serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of disobedience and the importance of wholeheartedly pursuing a life devoted to God. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. James 4:4. This verse does not imply forsaking everything in the world, but rather rejecting anything that opposes God, including the wickedness that may have once been part of our lives. Lot's wife's punishment, swift and irreversible, serves as a chilling reminder that opportunities to obey God are finite. Some may dismiss warnings of hell and judgment as mere scare tactics, but Jesus himself spoke extensively about hell. Countless examples throughout history demonstrate the consequences of rejecting God's grace. To downplay these warnings would be to withhold the truth, making us complicit in the judgment of sinners. God, through the prophet Ezekiel, established the role of a watchman to warn his people. Lot's wife's story remains relevant as God's judgment and the call to repentance remain unchanged. Will you heed the warning and seek refuge in Jesus' blood, allowing God's angels to lead you to safety? Abraham, rising early, witnessed the smoke ascending from the destroyed cities, a confirmation of God's judgment. He understood that God had honored his plea for the righteous and spared Lot. This scene serves as a model for how believers should respond to God's judgment, with humble acceptance, gratitude for salvation, renewed commitment to righteousness, and a deeper aversion to sin. Amidst the destruction, God remembered Abraham's plea and rescued Lot. However, Lot's subsequent actions reveal his moral degradation. He fled to the mountains with his daughters and, under the influence of wine, engaged in incestuous relationships with them, resulting in the birth of Moab and Ben-Ami, the ancestors of Israel's enemies. This tragic outcome highlights the consequences of succumbing to temptation and moral compromise, even after experiencing God's deliverance. Despite being a righteous man, Lot's life was marred by hypocrisy. He sought to maintain a semblance of faith while indulging in the sinful lifestyle of Sodom. His story serves as a warning against the dangers of compromising our values and seeking worldly pleasures at the expense of our relationship with God. Lot's inability to escape Sodom's influence ultimately required divine intervention to save him from its destruction. This chapter in Genesis not only recounts God's judgment on a corrupt civilization, but also serves as a stark warning against emulating their ways. Lot's story, while demonstrating God's ability to rescue the righteous, emphasizes the importance of fleeing from temptation and seeking refuge in God's righteousness. It reminds us that true salvation involves not only escaping destruction, but also actively pursuing a life that honors and glorifies God. This story arc encompasses four major motifs: God's swift judgment, Lot's attachment to a wicked society, God's merciful deliverance of Lot, and the symbolic rebirth of Sodom through Lot's incestuous actions. From these, Israel could discern God's righteous judgment of wickedness and the folly of embracing such corruption. The lesson is clear. Do not love the world or its fleeting desires, for they are doomed to perish under God's judgment. Jesus, speaking of a future time of destruction, referenced Lot's wife and the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah as cautionary tales. He emphasized that those who prioritize worldly gain will ultimately lose both this world and the next. Jesus also noted that if he had performed the same miracles in Sodom that he did in Capernaum, the people of Sodom would have repented. This highlights that God judges based on knowledge and that the punishment for unrepentant sin exceeds physical destruction. The Bible places a high value on hospitality, which involves welcoming and caring for others, especially strangers. In the Old Testament, God commands his people to show kindness and love to foreigners, as they were once strangers in Egypt. Jesus and his disciples relied on the hospitality of others during their ministry, as did the early Christians. Hospitality was considered a vital virtue, particularly for leaders within the Christian community. It was seen as a reflection of genuine care and love for others. The book of Hebrews encourages us to extend hospitality to strangers, as some have unknowingly entertained angels through this act. Abraham's exemplary hospitality towards 3 strangers, who turned out to be the Lord and 2 angels, illustrates the importance of treating everyone with kindness and generosity. This story serves as a reminder to emulate Abraham's example and show love to both those we know and those we don't, as we never know who we might be welcoming into our lives.